Hello, I'm going to talk today about research specifically as it applies to essay number two. Some of you are confident in your topics and you may have already begun the research process. And I think in general, m- much of what I'm going to talk about in this video is going to review some things that you're probably fairly familiar with. I think the reason why I'm still think it's important and why I really want you to watch this is because part of what I want to do is talk about what you don't need to do for essay number two. So, in other words, I think when students hear that a paper involves research, they make a lot of assumptions about what exactly that means. And some of those assumptions hold true for this assignment and some don't. So, without any kind of further preface, I'll dive in. Essay 2 requires you to use at least three sources beyond your personal experience. You're not required to use personal experience. Some of you noted that the article we read, Why It's Time to Rethink Climbing Devil's Tower, the author used personal experience to kind of show and demonstrate his credibility on the topic. That's great. It's not something that you're required to do. One reason that you might do it, why you might use personal experience, is if you're writing about an issue or a place that is very local, that you have a lot of experience with, and that doesn't necessarily get a lot of news coverage, or might be hard to find sources about that particular problem in that particular place. So I'll talk about some strategies to deal with that challenge if that's the challenge you find yourself in. But that's kind of the area where using personal experience might be useful. Regardless, you need three pieces of evidence that you find through your research, three sources, in addition to any personal experience that you may or may not use. Now, you should note on the assignment sheet that there is no requirement that these sources be peer-reviewed sources, that you find them in the library databases, that they be objective or unbiased or any of those things. They are really whatever works for your particular topic. So I'm going to run through a really brief search. I'm going to imagine that I'm a student and I want to kind of write an update of the Devil's Tower, climbing a Devil's Tower thing. Maybe I'm not satisfied with Chris Coleman's solution and I want to propose a different solution. Or maybe I'm just curious about, have things changed since 2018? Is the problem still an issue? And if so, is there a better solution to it? So, as I mentioned, I am going to try to find whatever sources work for me for this assignment. And theoretically, if I was writing this paper, which nobody's going to do, one of the sources I would use would be this great article by Chris Coleman, right? Uh, there's a lot there. But let's think about other things we might find. We will look at the library databases a little bit towards the end of this video. And when we get to essay 3, we'll talk about library research in much more detail. Not because, really because essay 3 is going to be a little bit more extended version of this. Many of you will find that using library databases will be very helpful to you in essay 3. But we're going to start with something really basic. And it's something obviously that you all know how to do, but let's just indulge me for a moment to think about what we can do when we just start Googling something, how that's useful, how it can actually be challenging in certain ways, and then what to do with the results we find. So I want to find out more about Devil's Tower, in particular climbing at Devil's Tower. So right away, I have a lot of interesting results. Uh, One is this site called Mountain Project. Here's some information from the National Park Service. That's interesting. Here's looks like a climbing guide. Interesting. Interesting, Wikipedia on the route. Wikipedia like on the actual climbing route. So a couple things here. First of all, when you Google something, you don't want to stop on page 1. And the reason for that, as I think many of you know, is that Google is an excellent resource. It gives us access to a bunch of materials. It's kind of like turning on the fire hose. And you can kind of drown in materials, especially depending on your topic, and you don't know how those materials are organized. Obviously, Google's algorithm is proprietary. It's one of the reasons why it's such a valuable company. And so we don't know, like, why is it that, some results are on page 1, other results are on page 20. Certainly, I'm not going to look through all 2 million results here, but I would like to just kind of scan through maybe the first 10 pages, something like that, to make sure I'm not missing something. This is interesting. I'm not going to do that on video here, but I just want to remind you that we don't just want to content ourselves with really what I usually see students do when they search for a source or when they do research. They do a Google search. They know they need 3 sources. So 1, 2, 3, those are going to be my 3 sources, right? They just go with the first 3 things. And that is an idea that we really want to move away from. So let's see what we have here. Um, so this is an interesting site, and it's something that I think that students maybe are taught sometimes that this is not like something you could use in an academic paper. It's a commercial climbing service that is, it's offering guiding to climbing Devil's Tower. Actually, this is like a page that's going to lead us to guides. So I'll click on one of these. So sometimes I'll show students sites like this in class, and immediately hands will go up and they'll say, you can't use that. Why? Why can't you use it? Well, it's a .com instead of a .org. We learned this rule somewhere that if it's a commercial site that we can't use it. And I agree. If I was looking for, let's say, research on the ecological impact of climbing Devil's Tower, or let's say a news story that gave multiple perspectives on the ethics of climbing Devil's Tower, I would not go to a commercial climbing service. However, let's say I wanted to know, hey, these commercial climbing services, are they acknowledging the problems that Chris Kallman wrote about? Do these commercial climbing guides talk about Native American heritage and Devil's Tower at all? Is it mentioned anywhere on their website? If it is, that's interesting. If it's not, that's interesting, right? So in other words, I can use sources for different kinds of things. And the fact that this is a commercial climbing service, yeah, there's lots of things I wouldn't use it for. But if they have like more detailed information about Devil's Tower on here, and again, it either mentions Native American heritage, it mentions the voluntary closure, or it doesn't, that's really interesting to me. So I don't want us to be too narrow in what we think of as a source, especially for this paper, since you're writing about things that oftentimes, if you're writing about a local park, you're not going to find like peer-reviewed academic research about it, right? So you're going to have to expand your thinking a little bit about what kind of sources might be valuable. Here's another place that students often, I click on this and students go, no, you can't use that. Why are we taught not to use Wikipedia? Fairly frequently, I hear from students, well, I was just told never to use Wikipedia. Well, I think, as with many rules, there's good principles behind it. We know that Wikipedia, for instance, there's no named author. And usually in academic writing, we want to be able to refer to like, well, who wrote this? We want to know where our information is coming from, right? We know that it can be edited. We know that some articles are of lower quality, although we should acknowledge that some are really high quality articles. So those are all the reasons why I think, high school teachers or maybe some college composition teachers would say, hey, watch out for Wikipedia. I really, you should not have Wikipedia in your works cited. You should not be quoting from Wikipedia. And on that point, I agree. We should not be quoting from Wikipedia in our papers. However, Wikipedia is an enormously valuable resource. I use it almost every day, I would say. And one of the reasons why it's so valuable is uh, it can give us context for things so we can go in deeper. It can also lead us to other sources. So I clicked on the main Wikipedia article for Devil's Tower. And if I was really interested in this, I'd read through it, see what's useful. But what's most interesting to me here is this list of references. And it's going to point me to all kinds of things that might be fascinating to me. The Sacred Land Film Project. That's really interesting. Um, Here's an article by Chris Coleman. That's interesting. Uh, some of this is not going to be relevant, but like the final climbing management plan for Devil's Tower, right? It's just a really well written Wikipedia article, which many of them are, is really filled with lots of fascinating resources that can be very helpful to me. So that's one reason why. Another reason why I would say Wikipedia is a useful resource that we shouldn't shy away from, again, not to cite in our papers, but just to consult, is I think that some of the fears about, well, anybody could edit it, you can't trust what you see on there, are a little bit overblown. So for instance, Wikipedia is actually pretty good about flagging things that are not well supported. So that's one point, right? They'll tell you, okay, well, here's some information, but there's no citation. That's a problem, or this needs to be verified. The other thing I would say is, you know, we get a little suspicious about Wikipedia because anyone can edit it, right? Um, and this is true. So I'm going to edit the Devil's Tower page, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'm going to go to, sorry, I need the different editor. Well, I'll just to make a point here. I'm just going to delete this paragraph, and I'm going to say Devil's Tower was created by Santa Claus in 1947. And then I'm going to, hit period, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to hit publish changes. I'm not going to do that. Okay, cancel. If I did, if I had hit publish changes, what's going to happen? Well, what is very likely going to happen is somebody who works on editing this page is going to get an alert that there was an edit made. They're going to see that it was clearly vandalism, that somebody was just kind of being an idiot, and they're going to hit restore. And really, with Wikipedia pages, especially ones that are fairly well developed, that is things that get vandalized, that get changed, that get distorted, don't hang around for very long because people really take ownership and pride in this information. I'm spending a lot of time talking about Wikipedia. Again, it's not something that's to be in your works cited or in something that you quote from, but it's something I want to mention because students are often like given good advice, but almost take it too far to the point that they ignore this thing that could really be helpful. That pointed me to this. Here's an interesting site about kind of heritage, Native American heritage here. May or may not be useful. Here's an interesting article that was in the works cited. One of the links was dead, or no, it was just, yeah, one of the links was dead, so that's an issue. But if I went through those references, I bet there would be some really interesting things that I could find. So essentially, what I'm saying is that we want to kind of open up our thinking about what a useful source is for this project. We want to keep in mind that there aren't any rules about what kind of sources you can and can't use. And we want to think about sort of what you need. Right? So as you're writing, as you sit down to start writing, you want to think really clearly. Well, what do I need? Do I need to just understand a lot of background information about this before I can actually even start doing research? Okay, then the Google search with Wikipedia and some kind of basic overview type articles are great. Do I need? Uh, do I want to see what various opinions are on this topic? Not if they're right or wrong, but just what are various opinions. Then a Google search, finding a bunch of articles that make an argument, even if they're quote unquote biased, it's still useful to just show me like varying opinion. Do I want to have, am I looking for something that is a little bit more data driven, that has a research focus or whatever? Then I can try to find those things through Google or perhaps through the library database. So I'm going to wrap up this video now, and I will add a part two. I'll make part two a little shorter, looking at the library databases for when Google is not helping you find what you need.